Welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Andrew Collins with me today. Andrew is the CEO of Sentient Jet, which is one of the premier providers of private aircraft travel solutions. One of the larger jet card companies in the world. You've been there about a decade now, Andrew? You've been running Sentient Jet for quite a long time.
I've been running Sentient Jet for since 2012. That's when I got that call from Ken Rickey, and he said, "Why don't you run the company?" type of thing. And so, yeah, it's been happening since then. I've been here actually since 2004.
Wow, it's been fun to watch you guys grow over the years. I mean, I knew Sentient Jet before you got there. It was kind of fun watching it come out of the, kind of rise from nothing to where it is today. So it's all good. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
You guys must be crazy busy right now. What's the landscape look like in the business side of the house?
Yeah, look, we were talking about this earlier, but in the pandemic, you had sort of that first part, which everybody sort of was wondering what could happen. And I think there was that pause. Then the pandemic drove, essentially, we all became evangelists for why private was important. And then all the sales grew and all the interest grew. And one would argue the addressable market grew in the process. And then, we then as an industry took on all that volume. And, it's not an industry that is based on a commoditized supply. It's one that has a sophisticated and constricted, supply, right? And so we had to work our way through that. We're doing really well. I think our field operations team and our flight operations team have been great. We've had to work through, like everybody else, taking on greater volume. But look, I think what this market did, which is really fascinating, is it rationalized pricing. It exposed, kind of the true nature of how important capital is to the business. And I think it showed that, this is something people need to pay a premium for. Mm-hmm. And in order to service them the way they expect, that is expensive. That's a cost, right? And there was a lot of runaway trains in the industry before this that could kind of subsidize or could kind of throw out different models that I think created a lot of noise along the way. But I think what this has done is really kind of brought forth almost a discipline, mm-hmm. and is forcing companies to really look at it and say, okay, this is what a price point should look like. You do need to pass on a fuel surcharge. You do need to think about these things, right? You can't just hope, as they say, hope's not a strategy. You can't just hope in 3 months things are going to shift or what have you. You really have to say, this is the world we live in. And you then have to look at, what you have in aggregate demand and say, how am I going to service that? And I think we've done an effective job between kind of the people, process, technology steps that go into that. But yeah, so far, so good. Pretty good right now.
That's good. The one thing you said in there was, it's rationalized pricing and it is a premium product. Yeah. And the one thing I've been kind of scratching my head, and you've got elements out there that have been talking about the democratization of business aviation. And I'm like, that's like trying to create a diet pizza. It just doesn't, it doesn't necessarily work that way.
Here's the way I look at it. It's kind of like, when I describe one of our companies and we talk about it as vertical lift, it's actually helicopters, right now. And, but it's got this great name known as vertical lift. Okay. And that sounds a little bit, more engaging perhaps. I don't know. But long story short, I think if you tell me that I'm sharing an aircraft or it's seat sharing and you call it democratization, you're just giving it a name. It's already existed. But I think that it's really hard to democratize $7,000, $8,000 an hour. I mean, it's, they're in conflict with one another in many respects.
It is. And that's like I said, where I've always been scratching my head. But here's the realistic thing is that the airlines this summer have been getting, the tar knocked out of them.
Sure.
Between weather, their operations, pilots, the regional jet carriers. I was just talking to a senior VP of operations at one of the regional jets. He says, we have no spare airplanes because we have no spare pilots. So if we go down, I know personally, I just, bought a ticket from Wilmington, North Carolina to Miami, $1,300 round trip, coach.
Hey, there you go. Coach.
And coach. And, I think about if I'm a company now putting 5 people on a jet, am I really, is it really costing me all that much more to buy a jet car and put my
Right.
teams on a private jet, knowing that they're going to get to where they need to go versus, praying the regional airline in Chicago shows up.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point, because prior to this, everybody would always do that comparison and it would break, right? They would always say, let's compare first class to, always somebody would come in and say, hey, I want to write a great article on you guys. Let's compare a first class route to private. And, you'd always have to explain, like, look, it's not really going to do what you want it to. But now it's a lot closer. You're right. And I do feel like there's also a difference in the way people are thinking of travel. The relationship to an office or the relationship to a headquarters is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the CEO of American Express at the beginning of the year made a really interesting statement that said he felt like there will be, sort of his executive team might return to headquarters 4 or 5 times out of the field annually. And you might do that differently. And you might think about a private solution to do that, because if that's the only time they're going to be, together, for instance, you're going to want to make that flawless and, get as much surety as you can to bring them together. Yeah, I think that does absolutely make a lot of sense.
My neighbor in my office complex, very good friend of mine, is private equity. He's in the medical side of private equity. He calls me from LaGuardia Airport and he says, my flight just got canceled, and then it got canceled again, and then it got canceled again.
Yep.
And I can't make it home for 3 days.
Ooh.
Do you have a solution for me? Yeah. Do you have an option? Now imagine, that's him. And now imagine if it's, you absolutely have to be somewhere on Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And the difference becomes what's it's less the dollars and cents and more of, hey, what makes sense for the business. And I'm hoping that's the way people start to, I think that business has got to shift. My personal opinion is that, if you got a net worth of $10 million or more, you should just have a jet card. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's, not really it's not going to make a dent in your life. But it's something you can afford and should have.
Yeah, it's that peace of mind. And, you mentioned something interesting, that your gentleman that you just mentioned was in private equity. One of the things we've noticed, and I've sort of spotted at the beginning, was, the people that have been flying for business have really been transactional. They've been deal teams. They've been, people that are, out and about. And some of it gets buried because, you might have a personal jet card and it might just be Craig as the name on the card or what have you. But in actuality, you're flying for business. So again, you're going to see more folks along those lines that, that's a great example. If that person needs to be there, if that person needs to have that backup, if that, they can still fly commercial, but you're probably going to find that, like anything else, you're going to pick and choose your routings, because you're going to know, like, these have a good shot, and some of them don't. And that's probably where we're going to be for at least the next year or so.
Yep. Now you guys you've got great visibility across all the operators. You're the customer of all the operators.
Right.
How are they, how are you keeping the quality up? How are you making sure that they're not committing to stuff that they can't? I mean, they're running 100 miles an hour too. How is it all affecting your business throughout the supply chain?
Look, we have a really stringent certification process, and we have adhered to that the entire time, even, during the heavy volume of the pandemic. And I would just say that a few things, these are people that we've been partnered with in many respects for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. So there's a deep set of relationships there that go back. And we also have the financial might, as a company that, Ascension alone is, outside of One Sky is probably, I don't know, $500 or $600 million this year in top line. It's not the biggest company in the world, but we have the wherewithal between our traditional business, which is profitable, as well as, the One Sky family business and might and balance sheet. We can make arrangement with, various operators for things. And, we between the stringency, between the commitment and the pre-buying that we do, I would tell you we tend to run our business a lot similar to where it was, pre-pandemic. That said, what we are seeing is the same thing that's hitting the industry, whether you're fleet-based at one of the larger kind of fleet-based companies, whether you're fractional or whether you're membership or what have you, all the way through to the operators. It's the same thing. Airlines have it, with pilots and crews. So too does private, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to figure out, the best way to bring pilots on and retain them and, make life interesting for them. You got to think about quality of life, right? Operators are looking at and dealing with the same thing that the national programs are dealing with: fuel, right? Slot differentials, various things like that. They're also looking at making sure that they can keep up with traditional maintenance cycles, right? Mm-hmm. And the things that are supposed to be scheduled, that they happen. And, resting crews and maintenance are probably two of your bigger things that, even if an operator has, 20 aircraft or 15 aircraft, they don't have all those cycles. They don't have all that capacity because there's going to be things that are going up and down for various reasons. You've just got to make sure you're partnered with the people that are doing that accordingly, right? And I'm not suggesting anybody is out there cutting corners in any way. I'm just suggesting we have a certification process that we stick to, and we make sure we're working with, and we make sure our partners are happy with us. That is another key, right? It can be in a marketplace situation where one, can look at the counterparty and just say, look, I'll just give you this price and that's that, or we'll do this, or it's a transactional relationship. We're very different from that. Mm-hmm. I could name the half dozen people that are kind of under the hood here that everybody knows by name and everybody knows in the industry and everything else, because they've fostered and built great relationships over time. And we kind of take care of our own in many respects. So, but I think everybody's feeling, the supply chain challenges and so on and so forth that are out there. I think the question is, do people stick, and are they sticking to the way that they've traditionally operated? And the folks that we use, we believe they are, and, we continue to work with them and partner with them.
How are the conversations shifting a little bit? I mean, you've got a lot of partner operators that you're talking to, and you're buying a lot of time from them. And obviously your success is guaranteed by their success. So how are those conversations changing now? When you may go to an operator and just say, hey, look, we know you need to make some money on this thing. You've got to be successful, make some money too. Here's our challenges.
That's how you have to handle it. It can't just be, a transactional thing. It's got to be how does your business run? This is how our business runs. Do we fit together? Right. The other thing is there's some folks that, we've worked with in the past or in the recent past where, they've really felt like, because the market is what it is, I'm just going to go to the top of pricing, or I'm going to put much more onerous terms on something. And that might satisfy, your short-term gain, but, who you want to partner with are the folks that are in it for the long term. Right. And I don't know that every single person we partner with thinks of it that way, but we do. And so a lot of what we do is, and I talk to, for instance, Adam Hohulin, who runs our flight operations, all the time about this, which is, who do we love? Who do we like working with? Who really, gets it? Who tends to really want to partner? I want our operator partners to make money. I want them to make great money. Okay. And that's why they should work with us. And quite frankly, we are in a bit, they don't have to take on the SG&A to have a sales force at a retail level. They can work with us, and we can figure out, how to right down to the predictable cash flow they can get off of it to go out and finance aircraft or anything else in their business. Right. And that tends to work really well. And the biggest thing, Craig, is you got to be consistent all the time. So I don't know that the conversations have changed. I would tell you that perhaps maybe the players have gotten more refined. And it's mainly because, some of the folks, as I said, that, see this market as kind of that, that gold rush 49er market and nothing else. That's harder to play, in that scenario, right? Because that's where somebody's just looking to maximize that transaction. And that's not always going to work with us or be congruent in the way our model works.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I want our folks to make money, but, we've got to figure out how to make it work within the model too. So it's probably a little bit more about, who we think we've put our arms around and hugged a little bit more during this and evolved in this, and especially in the last year or so.
Yeah, I got you. But, now you're part of, as we were talking about before we came on, obviously One Sky Aviation, Sentient Jet, Flex Jet, FX Air, and then what's now Halo.
Yeah, Halo is, Halo is a helicopter management company in the UK. And here it's been rebranded to FlexJet Private Helicopter. And that'll eventually make its way over to Europe. How are all the companies? I mean, obviously the goal is a little bit of vertical integration, different products, keep the customer sticky.
Yeah.
How's it all? How are all these companies, these brands playing together? How do you guys talk to each other? How do you work with each other?
Well, if you've done this right, if you've gone out and if you're Ken and if you've purchased the right company, there's always going to be inherent competition, right? Because you that's what you want in your talent base for sure. I would tell you though that we've all figured out a really interesting dynamic. I talk to Mike Silvestro at FlexJet all the time. We refer customers back and forth depending on their needs. If I have somebody that needs an on-demand flight and is somebody that was referred to me personally, I might call Greg Slow up over at FX Air and ask Greg to have his team handle it, and so on and so forth. I think you have two things that are really interesting. One, you have a very discrete buyer for each storefront or brand, right? You have a fractional buyer that's buying into Red Label, that's buying a newer Gulfstream, that like, as you go through those hoops, that's a very segmented and specific buyer, okay? Then you have somebody that's like, look, I just want to make sure that I'm flying with somebody that has, an incredibly strong safety program, has thought aircraft type, but here's what I need. And that's a card holder, right? Because they've got the volume, they go with it. That's a Sentient customer, okay? And then you have the people that they just do not want to commit. They want it per drink or per flight, and they're an on-demand flyer, or they buy that way as a corporation, right? They're used to buying that way, so they're an on-demand flyer. So you have all these discrete kind of segments that buy into the market and represent kind of the primary flyers for each brand. Then it's like a Venn diagram, right? You have the person that owns a FlexJet share, that owns a Sentient card, and just talked to Greg Slow about an on-demand flight. And that happens all the time.
Right.
And we love it. And the funny part is at first, when we were acquired, into the family, first thing you go to is like, oh my gosh, like, am I going to, lose a customer base, or is this going to happen, or is that going to happen? Nope, not at all. People kind of figure out where their home is, or they're a blended flyer. And, the blended flyer thing is not something a lot of people talk about, but people hold multiple solutions. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of it is that when you're a standalone company, you think you have your loyalist customer base. I guarantee they're cheating on you. It is what it is, right? It is what it is. And, for many years when Sentient was a standalone entity, we thought we even had it labeled. They were loyalists. And then we went out and acquired a company, and I was looking through their customer base, and I went, wait a minute. And it was like your girlfriend was cheating on you, something, right? But at the end of the day, what you start to realize is blended flying is very real. So somebody that owns a large cabin aircraft share with FlexJet, but wants a shorter mission, might use Sentient, right? Or they might have a business need and they go to the on-demand side. And that is a very natural thing to have happen in our business, but no one will ever come out and talk about that because they usually represent a singular brand. That's the purview we get, so we can see the balance. We also see people that, the needs change. So Craig, a good one is, somebody was using a corporate, fractional, and now they've retired. And so they're no longer access to that, but they still want to stay within One Sky. They buy a card. Somebody unfortunately passes away, but, some of the people that are part of the estate still want to fly, but they don't need, a card. Last thing I would say is that there's a really strong chemistry match within One Sky amongst a lot of the leaders. And that tends to propel a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I would tend to think if we didn't have that, or if we really had a lot of friction, we probably wouldn't be where we are. I would credit Ken with that. I would credit some others with that. But I think that bringing together of talent has been really key to it as well, in the personalities.
You guys are monumentally entrepreneurial organization, directional aviation, One Sky, Sentient. It's a very aggressive entrepreneurial organization. So you know, about a year ago, you started Halo. You got you bought the Associated Air Group out of New York, out of AAG, out of Sikorsky or Lockheed Martin, and you got it. How's all that doing for you? So talk about the helicopter side,
that's been
that's
great.
All growing.
What I loved about the helicopter side is it's kind of like the phone call I got to run the business, right? Ken just called me out of the blue one day. I was with my son, in our local library, and I was bringing him. He was very young, and the phone rang, and Ken's like, "Hey, I just bought your company. I'd like you to run it." Right? It just was one of those calls, and you're just wow, boom. Similar, kind of at the turn of last year. I was working on the transaction for Halo because I do a lot of work with Ken and Mike Rossi and others doing M&A. And so we decided to buy Halo, the company in London. And Ken eventually, came to me and said, "Hey, could you look at what it would take to bring AAG into the fold and kind of think about vertical lift and what we're going to do with it?" And so my job was to, kind of get airdropped into the AAG team. And a credit to them, because I think they were so used to, their owner. And I had to kind of work through, talk to a lot of people. We worked on a lot of stuff and kind of right-sized a few things. We decided to move their headquarters. We decided to do a lot of things. But ultimately, my goal and my job wasn't to, take that and Halo and bring it into one thing and just lead it. We also had to find a leader for that business. And so what was nice was I spent about 6 months with various folks taking AAG, bringing it into the One Sky fold, right? Plugging it in. We did everything that you would traditionally do in an integration, the back office stuff and so on and so forth, the buying power. We got their techs, new tools and things like that. And we started to look at where it would go. We changed their pilot scheduling and some other stuff. We just really tried to bring in energy into what was a platform that I think needed it, to be honest with you. And so we took that, and that has since, become FlexJet Private Helicopter. It's now based in Bridgeport, Connecticut at Sikorsky. It is the largest twin engine S-76 provider in the Northeast. But more importantly, it's now, the various helicopters are going into FlexJet livery, and they are becoming integrated and ingrained into that product set. Because what we learned was, you took a G650 from overseas, you still had that last mile to go to in your journey. We could help you with that, right? We found that this notion of short distance aviation that a lot of folks were talking about as kind of discrete businesses, we kind of saw it as natural extension to the business. And we see that in Europe as well. In fact, we see it more in Europe in some ways. And so right now, you have FlexJet Private Helicopter, and that'll eventually evolve over to Europe. Halo is a management company, and it's the largest Leonardo managed set of helicopters in Europe. And it's got a very interesting and extensive ownership base in terms of the aircrafts and in terms of their charter customers. And so that's being operated independently, but also assisting in driving to that FlexJet Private Helicopter business. But we see that as key, and it's also laying the foundation for what could be the future of flight with eVTOLs, and gaining that short distance experience and gaining that those operational movements and that expertise in house the same way that we've built it up in the fixed wing.
You guys have been big investors in the eVTOL.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Are you that bullish on that market? I mean, you're watching it closely. Benefits, challenges. Is there a real market for eVTOL in the way that a lot of the manufacturers are talking about it? Tell me your thoughts.
So a lot of capital has gone into that market. I think you're going to see, an interesting shakeout in that market. We're big believers. The pros are, the things I just talked about, assuming that the future evolves to, a frictionless kind of convenient way to do short distances and think of things like that. And it'll probably get there in a very interesting manner. It may not be passengers right away. It might turn out to be things going out to oil rigs or, all sorts of other ways that something gets adopted. But eventually it makes its way to certification, we believe. And we believe there's both a business and a product and so on and so forth. Where it lies is an interesting question, right? In terms of the brand structure and what we do. I would say those are the pros. Like it really does have that future of flight. I think you have to invest in the future of flight. We had invested in supersonic. Ken is not afraid. Our chairman, Ken Rick, he's not afraid to really look around that corner and invest. I would tell you the cons are really interesting, and they're very limited at this point, and that might be the con. One, everybody at OneSky wants to know about them and work on them, right? Because it's the future, right? It's the coolest thing going. It's the shiny object. Myself, I worked on that order, our fleet order for 200 eVTOLs from Eve, the spin out from Embraer, and we see 100 in the greater New York area and 100 in kind of the London area, and so that was a big commitment that we made, and we love that partner. I think in the meanwhile, it's very interesting because all of our lines of business, are held to eVTOLs, it is still, we're working in the background, partnering with Eve, doing some testing and investing in certain areas. We just did committed to their urban air traffic management system, which they've spent a lot of time on. But, Craig, it's a future, right? So it's, and you can look at the street because there's a bunch of eVTOLs that are out on Wall Street. And, it's the same thing asking an investor base, why are you investing? Right? I'm going to give you a similar answer, which is there is a future here. You can see it. There's enough willpower. There's enough capital. And there's enough governmental interest, right? Both at an FAA and a CAA level that, some facet of this is happening and it's game on. The question will be exactly what does it look like and how does it get there? And, we've laid a bet. And we believe our bet is a pretty sound one, and we did it for various reasons. But at the end of the day, I think we're very bullish on, looking at the future of flight. And the last thing I would say is, in addition to finding the leader, a gentleman named Eli Flint for the vertical lift division, we took one of our executives in Europe, Adam Tweitel, who had founded Private Fly. Sure. And Adam is now the head of future flight for OneSky. So if you're at Revolution Aero, for instance, you'll see him and so on and so forth. But he and I now talk about various things, but he's kind of out there looking around at things as well. And so we're just, we kind of have learned a lot from the past. We're really focused on the present in terms of, the metrics we have to hit, but we also look a lot at the future and looking around that corner.
Gotcha. No, I love it. So, keeping along the tech background, you guys obviously digital.
Sure. Absolutely.
Is becoming a big player. Everybody's sort of shifting.
Yeah.
How are you guys? How are you morphing your digital future as far as bookings or, tell me what's revolutionary.
Well, it's interesting because I think people get enamored with tech and will do tech for, or digital for digital's sake, right? We actually, so if I use Sentient as a good example, Sentient waited to put a mobile app into play probably 2 years past when a lot of other folks had, because we just wanted to understand at the time what our customer base wanted to do with it. And so, at the time, our average customer was north of 60 years old, probably hadn't had that big technology curve that a lot of others had. So, but what we found was, simple booking, just book, okay? And to book and make it simple, right? In the terms of kind of that Apple-like simplicity that everybody's so used to now, that's really hard. Especially with what you go through in private aviation, and then you have legacy systems in the background. So we concentrated a lot on making that right. And we had a wonderful not only adoption, but kind of a seamless integration into our base. And we've watched, that grow. And now I would tell you that if, you're thinking about our total transactions for the year, somewhere between 30 to 35% will likely be, digital transactions and bookings, right? That'll probably grow to 50% by the end of next year. And it doesn't mean that we don't have, a huge team of client services personnel or anything like that. You can communicate with us any way you want. You can fax us if you wanted to. I mean, that's a weird word to hear these days, but we'll deal with any way that you want to communicate. But what we found is we saw the growth curve happening pre-pandemic in digital. And then as McKinsey put out that report that said, the first 10 weeks of the pandemic drove 10 years of technology adoption because everybody had to use Instacart and everything that was touchless. And so what we discovered was the alignment between that forced adoption meeting with, that new kind of customer that probably wouldn't have flown privately before the pandemic, but this was the thing that got him in the ring. Mm-hmm. Suddenly we started to really see a lot happen. And then as volume really increased, in some cases, it was the most efficient way for somebody to book, right? So they really chose that path. So we've done that and we've evolved it since. I'm a big digital person and prior to business school was in digital technologies. And I believe in transformation, but I don't believe in it just to do it. It's got to be done in a way that is meaningful to the business. So we've really proved out with mobility that you could drive a new business. And then this past summer, we've launched something called text to book. That might sound relatively, pedestrian. Oh, you're just using text to book a jet or something. In reality, we have almost like an artificial intelligence-like quality behind technology that doesn't require you to have an app. You can use when we authenticate you, so no one can come in that's not a card holder. But you can quote, you can book, you can fool around with text. But in an organic environment that most people are used to using now, you can drive a booking. And we're just going to continue to do those things. Right. And the reason being is that we're trying to remove as much friction as we can from private aviation and generate the best possible experience. The flip side of it, for what's in it for us, outside of driving a experience for our customer base, and happy customer equals happy life. But the other side of it is we get the data, we get to see what customers are booking, we get to see kind of how they're converting, we get to see how they're adopting technology. That's really important. Additionally, it creates operational efficiencies for us. So, way back when we used to measure just like phone calls per head in our call center. We're now looking at it and saying, okay, how many different avenues can we transact and where are the most popular transactions coming from? And do those segments look different and so on and so forth? And eventually we'll determine what it costs per channel to book and all the other things that you would think about. So technology is really important. And then at OneSky, we have a heck of a CTO and, we're really looking across. FlexJet uses mobility purely for a services component as an extension of Red Label. We are unifying a lot of platforms so that we have, a cloud-based kind of universe that has a lot of seamlessness to it. So I would say tech is, part of our everyday conversation, action, and weaved within the fabric of OneSky at this point. And, I like having the various brands because the various brands can be almost test beds for the various ways that, digital can either touch the base of clients or, touch the base of our team members or our operational folks.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's very high touch. I mean, you never want to go all digital because your customers are very high
Absolutely
touch.
Not.
There's that hybrid. You're like, well, we don't want to go too far with it, but we don't want to go, it's a very, it's very high touch. So obviously a lot of data coming out of it. And, I don't want to say, are the OEMs coming to you guys and saying, hey, look, y'all are, how this is affecting their jets and how can we, improve the performance, or the fuel people coming to you, or people going, hey, look, how can we use this, or how can you guys use this data to reduce cost, increase sustainability, a lot of issues around the industry. Can be solved when you have the right stuff. I mean,
100%. But look, I think the OEM relationships, especially at the FlexJet level, are on a level where, the dialogue is very consistent with that kind of thinking. Some more than others, to be honest with you. But in general, still not to the extent that you probably would think of. I think a lot of the action and activity off of the data, comes almost at an internal level. So there's probably a lot of opportunity for that. And that's actually a really salient question, right? And if folks are in the OEM world that are listening and such, that's a great way to start thinking about, when I think about, if I think about what you raised before, right, with Eve and the eVTOLs, right, where there's data sharing and kind of information is, between our vertical lift group and Eve, right? And they know routing and they know things and they know operational components, that, shared kind of data and that shared kind of, best in class, that's really important in that relationship. It's actually a key part of that, bonded relationship. So it does happen. I'm surprised it doesn't happen a little bit more, to be honest with you. But then again, I think everybody looks at data somewhat differently, to be honest with you. And, for us, data has really served an interesting purpose, which is when you think about a lot of the groups out there, the people that make dashboards, for instance, are great examples of this. When you make a Domo dashboard or a Tableau dashboard, right, you don't want a million cards looking at you, so it's analysis paralysis. You've got to really knife your way down to those 9 KPIs that you could look at and really understand the spectrum of your business at any given moment. That's glanceable information. That's power. That takes a lot of work. So, it's funny, I could bury people in data, but the question is, how valuable is it, right? And most businesses could do that. And a lot of businesses get carried away with it and get caught up in data that's, more diagnostic or nice to have than it is a painkiller. Right? All the data that I look at, hopefully on a daily basis, is almost a painkiller unless I'm off looking at some, future project or a trend or being diagnostic on margin or something like that. But for the most part, the stuff I look at should be pretty hardcore and pretty much center. And to get there takes a lot. And then to optimize it over time takes a lot. So I would say we've gotten better and better at it. I would say that the more outlets we have for our consumers to touch us with that, to give us data points, absolutely think that there's value there to that third-party ecosystem. No question. I think that's a great question.
Are you guys using, off the beat, machine learning? I take, machine learning now is the big thing. And I got to think between all the everything that you guys are gathering and combine that with machine learning, is that helping you with pricing or, faster quoting and, better scheduling?
Yeah.
Is that starting to get refined down to like a really well-oiled machine?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, but I think if folks know and are really plugged in and understand the business, optimization comes through both technology and brain power, right? Tech can't purely drive 100% of optimization because tech can't accommodate for human nature. So there's always going to be that one element in your schedule that gets messed up that tech didn't see coming, right? So that's why you have the teams that you have. That said, especially in the last couple of years, we've really paid attention to dynamic pricing and how we're getting to dynamic pricing and using inputs that are historical, right? So looking at 2 years versus data or 4 years versus peak data, for instance, right? Just in our business alone, the funny thing is this past year and a half threw a wrench in all the data, right? Because every other day became a peak day. Right. So it used to be that you could say, okay, here are the 23 days this year that are going to be really hard. Right now, if you went by last year, you'd be like, here are the 135 days.
Every day is
really hard. Right. So
every day is President's Day weekend. Right?
Exactly. So you're going to find that there's some of that. But I think when you normalize it, right, we have actually started to work exactly with what you're saying. And I would say that, again, it's at 2 levels, right? Durgar, CTO, kind of does, drives this at a one sky level. And Ken has really, been on top of this and pushed this. And then I'd say at the individual brand level, based on the knowledge of the customer base, right there, kind of at 2,000 feet above the customer, it comes at that leadership level, and then you kind of make those judicious decisions. And what's our capex this year? What are we investing in? And what are we pushing on? And so, I think for Sentient this year, it really was about, how do we extend mobility, and how do we create more operational efficiency, and how do we give a better experience to our consumer and address a certain segment of the base. And that was important, right? So that was kind of where we were versus, you might find that we're looking at how to think about the economics of, excess capacity on the fleet level at a FlexJet piece. And that might require you to look at the value of that over a period of time. And that requires you to take a time horizon that might go back trailing 12, trailing 24, trailing 36, and then running it through, that kind of learning that says, okay, what's this worth? When is this going to happen? When is that incident predicted to happen? And you can think about that then applying to all sorts of things like maintenance, things like that. So absolutely where we are and where we're headed, no question.
Yeah, I got you. How's sustainability? The one thing that scares me about the industry right now is the noise around sustainability, green. A lot of, everybody looks at the business jet, not as a tool, but as a, depending on which side of the aisle you're looking at from, it's either a tool or it's the most horrendous object in the sky. I look at it as something that provides billions of dollars of economic value and thousands of jobs across the nation. But everybody's paying attention to SAF, sustainability. You guys are got to be on the cutting edge of that now and thinking about it. So talk about that a bit.
It's funny. I think to the public and to the somewhat not so public, they're focused on like Taylor Swift and people like that and what private jet travel looks like, and should they be doing it the way they're doing it or what have you, and that's okay. I mean, look, I'm the same way you are. The way I think about it is, if I was to go into the other room right now and look in our command center at where we're flying, and I was to pick the story off to each of those flights, to your point, you'd find things that impact, major, economic drivers and GDP drivers. You'd find somebody that was going to a time-sensitive health appointment that was, very important to them. You'd find a family member reconnecting. You'd find, the list goes on and on and on before you get to a LeBron James, like, I'm going here or going there story. And so part of it is the perception, right? That's a piece of it. So I think there's almost an obligation on the industry side to continue to get out the message as to why people use private aviation. But I think that, I was saying this to somebody earlier, but Sentient's, message into the marketplace is a more thoughtful way to fly. And that's a statement we've really built around for a long time. And I think that's really kind of representative of the folk that work here. And so we thought about, what we wanted to do, and at the same time, For Air and that group was really forming and thinking about how they could impact the marketplace. And this hit Europe optically a lot more before it hit the United States. And if you were to drive from Heathrow into London city center, every other gas station is pitching what they're doing environmentally, and they're using it more as a marketing kind of tool than anything else. And it comes across either as a marketing tool or almost very defensive. So it's tough to think about it, when, people are pushing on you about it. And what I would tell you that in aviation, I think we have a responsibility to really handle it, look at it, contribute to the solution of how do we address it and be thoughtful and creative and unique. I don't think that we should be dismissive and just try to, give a link to an offsetting company or, just here's a blurb that, you can recite or what have you. So what we did is we worked with For Air and we offset, everything, not just at a carbon level, but at an emissions neutral level. So instead of 100% of an offset, we do 300% of an offset for every flight leg at Sentient Jet. And the Sentient Jet pays for that. That's not built into the pricing. That was really important, right? We wanted to understand how we could contribute, how we could work on this. And we don't know that we found, a solution per se to this. This is the start of something. Mm-hmm. But what it does is, it removes, remove is a bad word. It kind of offsets not just the carbon, but it gets into, the water vapors, the aerosols, the nitrous oxides. So it gets to true emissions offsetting. Mm-hmm. And then, when I look at it, so at the 6-month marker, we were just under 300,000 metric tons of offsetting. That's about a 17% increase over last year. And that represents, providing the energy to the average American town for an entire year, or planting 5 million trees over 345,000 acres. Yeah. It's impactful. It's significant. And, dare I say it, Sentient's still a small company. Yeah. Right. So it's just that, we're thinking about it in a way that says, how can we contribute? How can we differentiate? How can we be creative about it? And, a lot of it also has to do with the dialogue around our clients. And I would say that our clients have been very interested and asked, what are you doing here? How are you thinking about it? That's how we're thinking about it. And as much as I would love to tell you it's completely that, I'm altruistic and I want to really impact the environment here, that's very true. And that's why we're very thoughtful, and that's how we've done it. And I want our team members to be proud about how we've done it. But we're also, again, trying to see around that corner. I believe that ultimately, there will be some form of regulation around this. So, much like getting a digital transformation to happen, you do need a sustainability transformation to happen. And right now you can control that. You can think about that in as pragmatic a way as you can. And so, for instance, instead of just the 300% offset as to where we, stop, and you'll see exactly what you're offsetting, and there'll be an audit trail for that. And so we're thinking about it on a lot of different spectrums, and I don't know that we have it right, but I think, we wanted to get into it, and we wanted to get into the game per se, and we wanted to help figure it out. So that's how we've addressed it at the card level. FlexJet is doing something very similar, especially over in Europe. I know that FX Air is offering kind of a, it's a different model. So they're offering, one level, and then you can purchase into more, et cetera. But we've put a lot of thought around it, just like we kind of do a lot of our things. And
But that's the way it should go. It's not a yes or no, or black or white. It's hey, look, we understand the concern, and here's how we're addressing it, and here's how we're helping it and fixing it. And that's the message business aviation should be putting out there from NBAA on down. Every OEM, it's like, hey, look, we understand your concerns. Here's how we're going to address them moving forward, so that everybody's happy.
Yeah,
and that can be done.
It's 100%. I mean, it's like when Michael gets up at Corporate Jet Investor and talks about Embraer. It talks about them reusing, materials and things like that. I mean, everybody's thinking about it. The question is what do you put in action? What are you trying? What are you testing out? What are you learning from it? And, to your point, it is not black and white. It is not a yes or no. It is a, let's invest, let's figure this out, and let's continue to build on it. And to your point, SAF eventually could make its way, and probably will make its way across our operator community. Someday we may choose operators and who we work with based on that, or we may charge differently based on the fuel that someone's using. All of those things are real and could be real, but it's kind of like eVTOLs, right? That's ultimately an interesting destination because, you're pulling away from fossil fuels, but we don't know what that's going to be yet. So rather you should participate and, understand where things are at the moment and be part of that as you go. We put out a release this year on what we were doing, and we didn't do it as a chest thump. That's a little ridiculous. We did it because we just wanted to kind of spark a bit of conversation around it to see what everybody else was going to do. Yep. And hopefully that happens. And I hope others, jump in and have other creative solutions, et cetera. But that's ours.
Yep, I got you. So last question, we'll wrap it up. Are you bullish on the industry? What I mean, obviously you got a supply chain that you can't pump out a whole lot more airplanes. You got customers out there that are wanting to use them. Is this a sustainable bull market we're in right now, or how do you see the industry in the next couple of years post COVID?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would give you a hell yeah in terms of what I believe about the industry. I just think the industry needs to change. And I think we're witnessing it, and I think we all have a front row seat for it. So pricing rationalization is big, right? Look, it's basic supply and demand economics, right? If you've got supply, but supply is limited, okay, this is where like the Uber comparison always breaks down. There's plenty of black cars out there forever, but there's not plenty of jets. And so you have to price accordingly, and the consumer and the marketplace has to accept that. So that's the first part, right? Second, I do think that you'll see some unlocking and some loosening on the secondary market, right? And that's, from an aircraft perspective, that's because you probably had a lot of people that lunged in. I mean, this is classic. We have cardholders that did this, and now they're cardholders for this very reason. They lunged in. They just overshot everything. They immediately panicked and said, instead of buying a card or a fraction when the pandemic hit, I'm going to go in and buy a jet with a friend, or I'm going to buy a jet. Right. So they did. And then they got to see what the pro forma was like every month on what it was like to own a jet. And, that's an interesting pro forma, right? That's an interesting way to look at your money and the outflow. So I think a lot of people will bring some aircraft back into market that way, and that will help a bit. Or those people will look for, how do I subsidize this? And they will go into the traditional operator relationship where they charter X percentage of that capacity out in order to offset their costs. I think that cycle goes on. The OEMs, a little stuck. I think we're going to have to go through a couple of years of, some pain to get there. But, the one thing I would say is this is going to be a very spiky universe for the next year or two, and it's going to still fool a lot of people. And, we're trying to be cognizant of that. So September is probably not going to be the biggest volume month, but then you're heading right into the holiday season. And the same way that you're seeing, the talking heads on the various newsies right now say, well, you're going to run into the same commercial problems over the holidays. You might see that in private because everybody kind of gets lulled into this, well, hey, volume's down. We can go back into market with this or with that. I think you got to be careful. I think you have to think about this. So, but we did shake out a lot of folks that, this was probably not the best market for them to exist in, right? This was not for the faint of heart. Really making intensive capital decisions, really making, thinking about ways to garner more supply. All of that took a lot of, crystal ball moments, a lot of, capital, and, a lot of kind of holding your breath. Yep. And so we'll see where it goes. I am bullish on it. I feel like we'll grow as an industry and be better for it. But the pain's not over yet. I think we still got to go through some friction before we see the other side of this for sure.
I agree. So I'm a big fan of Sentient, directional, everything Ken's done over the years. It's been fun watching you guys grow. So thanks for coming on. Wish you more success.
Absolutely. Same to you, Craig. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Andrew.
You got it.